In this video I'm going to share with you why I use some standard fields in every table and also why I use a template object. So if you've been building in Knack for a little while, you'll be fairly familiar with having a form that adds a record to a table. So this form here, I have all the fields showing, so when it was added, who added it, and the company. So I'm just going to enter another company. Once I click submit, so that gets added to the table beneath. You can see I have an auto increment, a date timestamp, who added it, and the fact that the record is marked as no, it's not archived. Now, if I go back to the builder, these fields I have currently, I'm using an object called template, which I'll come back to shortly. But I have these fields here, auto increment, so it gives me a sequential number, the date the record was added, who added it, which is a connection to the accounts object. So you have to have your user roles enabled. So this is a connection to that accounts object. A short text field, which for this example I'm just using for the company, and a multi-choice field. So I'm going to look at these individually. So the auto increment field, if you click on that, it doesn't give you any options. It just gives you a unique number as an identifier. Now, the reason I use that, if you look at the properties of this particular table, so if you go into the settings, you have the name of the table, which is called template. You have a display field, which is how this would be shown in a connection, but we're not talking about that today. The sort order is the important part here, which is the auto increment. And that's set to show in high to low. So if I change this from the fields view to the records view, you will see that it goes 4, 3, 2, 1. So the most current record will always be at the top of this table, which as a builder is very useful for when you're building and testing, and when a record's submitted, you know it's going to be the one right at the top. So I always use my auto increment sorted this way in a table. My next one is the date timestamp. So this is just a standard Knack date time field, and it's set to UK format. Obviously you choose the format which is relevant, and you set it to current date, and then the time you can obviously choose between AM and PM or military. So I've just gone for 24-hour military and set that to the current time. So the important thing is here that is to have the date set to the current date and the time set to the current time. I'm just using a simple calendar options here. So every time a record is added, it will date and timestamp that for you automatically. You don't need to do anything about it. You don't need to make it a required field because, as you say, that will be automatically created when a new record is added. The connection to the added by is simply a connection to the accounts object, and you can do that by clicking on the connections link here, and then you can add a connection to the accounts object here. So if I look at this one that's already been added, it just says that this connects to one account and each account connects to many templates. That's this particular object. So this will just track who added the record. The short text field can be anything. In this case, it's just for a company. And then the archive field I have as a multi-choice field. Once again, it's not required, and it just has two options, yes or no. So it's either archived or it's not archived. Now I've done a separate video on archiving and soft deleting. So this is what I use this field for. And I have the default set to no. So every record that gets added automatically gets set as no, it's not archived. And I have it set as a radio button, but once again, a user wouldn't interact with this. So going over into the pages, I've built a page here. I'm just going to collapse these ones down to make it a bit easier. So I've built a page here called template, and it's got a couple of different components on it. This component at the top is a form, and this form, it adds a new template record. And currently I have all of the fields on here. So I'm just going to delete this to show you how to build this out very quickly. So I'm going to add a view and add a form, and it's going to be called the templates. And I'm just going to simply add that in. I'm not going to link it to a menu button. I'm just going to leave it as a form here. I'm just going to click away from that to deselect it, and I'm going to move that to the top above my table. So I also have an empty rich text field here, which just kind of pushes these other two components over to the left hand side more, otherwise they would stretch the full width of the screen. So this is my form to add a new record, and it's got all the different fields on here, so added, added by, company and archive. But I actually don't want to have these on here, so I'm going to delete the added, because that's the date timestamp which will automatically create the date and time. And this one I'm going to set as a rule, so I don't want to have who added it. I don't want the user to have to select that. I also don't want the user to say whether it's archived or not. So I've removed those 3 fields and I'm just going to save that. So if I just jump over into the live app and refresh my browser, that was obviously showing the previous form. So this will now refresh and just show me one field called company. I can obviously remove this title as well. So if I just come back to the builder, just go into settings, and I'm just going to remove the title that says add template. So it's now just one field. So I'm going to click back on this form and just add some rules. So first thing on rules is submit rules. I'm just going to have this show a confirmation message, but rather than a link to reload the form, I'm going to automatically reload the form. Then I'm going to go back a level and go into record rules. So here, this is where I would set up what to do when it's submitted. So I don't need any criteria. I can look, these are all my field values. I don't need to do anything with added because that will automatically date and timestamp when the record's added. But I do need to set who the added by, and you can set that to the logged in account. So whoever's logged in, it will track that one. And you can add multiple ones here, but I don't need to set anything. The company, obviously, someone's going to add that, and archived is automatically set as no. So I'm just going to save that. And once again, back to my live app and do a refresh. So now if I come into here and add another company, that goes to the bottom of the table. I get my sequential number here, so 5. I've got my date timestamp of when this was added. It's picked up who the logged in user is, because as you can see up here, this is the logged in user, and it's automatically put this as no. So these are my standard fields, which I would use in almost every table throughout any application. And the reason I've gone through this much detail with you is that these are fields that you have to set up each time you do a table. So if I was to come into here and add a new table from scratch, and I was going to call it equipment, so I have an equipment table or equipment object here, and Knack by default puts one field into it. It can't exist without at least one field. So then you'd need to come into here and say, okay, I need to add my auto increment. So there's no options on that. I'm going to save that. And then I'd need to come in and put my date time in and change the format to what you want. So current date time, military time, current time, save that. And then I'd need to just rename this so I can call it when it was added. So that's my date timestamp of when it was added. So I'm just going to move these around. So I've got my auto increment when it was added, and then I need to set up who added it. So link it to the accounts, and that will be able to track who added it. So I'd rename that to added by. And then I would need to finally add in the multi-choice field, which would be called archived. And I can do a quick edit here and just change these to yes and no, save those, and then say the default option is no, and it's radio buttons, and save. So I have to do that every time, even before I start playing around with this field, which is the actual field of the equipment name. So what I like to do is just have an object which is already set up. So if I just go into my template one here, I'm just going to delete these. These are the records we just created. So I'm now going to have a completely empty table, and I just call it template. So if I delete my equipment one, just get rid of this table. So if I needed to create a new table, I already have all my fields here. The only one I'd need to change is this one called company. So having this template here, I can simply click on here, say copy it to a new table, and I'm going to call it equipment and continue. It asks me what fields do I want. I'm actually going to just take all of them, and I'm just going to rename the company field. So do that. And now I have my template one here and my equipment table here. It's exactly the same. So I can then just come into here and change this field to equipment, and then add any additional fields or all the additional fields that I need without having to go through and set up the date format, the connection to the logged in user, and my archive field. So hopefully, I think you'll hopefully found that of interest. The kind of must-have fields. That's building on something I saw from a fellow colleague, Dave Parrish, who has an excellent YouTube channel, which I'll link to as well. He uses auto increment and the date timestamp as well. So just a couple of extra things for the archive process, and I'll link to the options I have for the kind of the soft delete as well in the description below. So hopefully that's of use. If you like that, give us a thumbs up, and I'll catch you on the next one.